Housing prices are high. So your question is, should I sell my property? Everyone starts asking this because as good real estate investors, we know we should buy low and sell high. What if all the values are high? Do we go ahead and sell? I'm going to break my answer down into two parts, albeit the answers for both are pretty similar, but I think it'll be more helpful to be able to specify. Those two parts are primary homes and investment properties. So let's start with a primary home. You own a primary home and you're thinking, housing values are super high. I could get max bang for my buck if I sell right now. Should I? My answer is, it depends on where you're going and what your plan is. Because if we're talking about a primary home, it means you live in it, meaning if you sell it, you have to go live somewhere else. So there's a couple different scenarios that I would look at potentially differently. So let's say that you live in a really expensive housing market like San Francisco. If you're talking about selling your house in San Francisco just to buy another house in San Francisco, you've now almost defeated the whole point because yeah, you're selling high, but now you have to buy high too. So yes, you might max out equity and get lots of money from your current house, but what are you going to buy? And in times when the housing market is totally crazy, it might actually be really hard to buy something else also. So you really want to look at that. Now, what if you're in San Francisco with a primary home and you're wanting to downsize? You've already been thinking about it. Maybe your kids just moved out. You don't need as much space. Maybe now is the time to do it because you can get max bang for the buck from your current bigger house. And while you'd still be buying high, because you're buying a smaller house, whether it's just smaller or maybe on the outskirts, you're going to pay less for that, while high for that house, still less than what you were paying. So if you're already thinking about it, okay, maybe that timing works out well. Let's say you live in San Francisco and you are taking a job transfer or you want to move out of San Francisco to a cheaper market in general. Let's say you move to Omaha, Nebraska, or St. Louis or Chicago, any of those. Yeah, you're still going to buy high over there. But again, we're talking massive difference in mortgage payments because a property in San Francisco is way more expensive than in the Midwest or wherever you might be moving. So kind of like the bigger house to downsize, if you're downsizing cities, if you want to call it that, that might make sense. Or the other scenario about a primary home, maybe you've been living in a primary home and you're going to sell that and just go rent somewhere for a while. I'm a huge advocate of renting. I'm a real estate investor. I have been for a decade and I rent where I live. All the houses I own, I don't live in. So if there's multiple reasons why you might be considering renting a house instead of owning one, if you're talking about switching from owning a primary home to renting a primary home, it could be a good time to go ahead and do that, especially when the housing values are pretty disproportionate to the increases in rent at the same time. So you might be able to rent for cheaper while you sell your house higher. That's the primary house side of things. So the moral of that story is consider all of the different scenarios and why you're selling. But if you're talking about just selling to take advantage of the high values, maybe you won't get as much out of that as you think. Maybe, but maybe not. Now let's move over to the investment properties. I'm just going to use rental properties as an example because I've heard a lot of people who ask this question, should I sell my rental property? Again, my answer is, it depends on why you're selling. If you're just doing it to take advantage of the equity that you have in that property, might not be worth it because let's say one scenario is you want to take all that equity and buy another rental property. Well, when housing values are that high, which is why you're wanting to sell it in the first place, guess what? You're going to have to buy high for a rental property. And while that's bad enough on the primary home side, it's worse on the rental property side because the whole point of a rental property is to make returns, one of which is cash flow. So if you have to buy high, you might not make the cash flow. So what's the differences in cash flow? The current house that you own, forget about the equity for a minute, versus what you could get as a new rental property should you sell this one. Is it worth it? Oftentimes not, because chances are if housing values are high, the returns aren't going to be there. You probably got a better deal years ago. So don't trade a really good deal for a not as good deal. Doesn't make any sense. Now, what if you're tired of owning rental properties and you're sick of being a landlord, or you're sick of dealing with property managers, and you were already kind of thinking of wanting to offload your portfolio? Now might be a great time for that. So what the question always is, what are you going to do with the money that you get? Because the famous thing that people say is, I want to take advantage of the equity that I have in this house, which is oftentimes a lot when we're talking about high housing values. What are you going to do with that money? If you just want to be rid of rental properties in general, which I get because they can be frustrating, go ahead and cash out. Even if you have to pay the taxes on the gain, or maybe like whatever you have to do, now might be the time. Better to do it now than later, when if housing values go down, or maybe you're just not going to get the same return for your buck. Or if you're going to buy a new rental property, here's another idea. Instead of getting rid of the one that you have, maybe you cash out refinance. So you still get to use all that equity without the tax hit to buy a second property. Make sure you run the numbers on this. Don't just assume that this is a good idea for any scenario. And please don't take what I'm saying to mean that, but it could work out. How much is that payment going to go up on your current rental property? And is that worth it in order to get another one? So I talked to someone recently who has a rental property in Denver. Denver is a highly appreciating market. My encouragement was, go the cash out refi route, because she got this property pretty cheap for how Denver goes. And Denver has been like on a straight up trajectory for a long time. And I would assume that it's going to continue to be, meaning she may have a lot of equity now. She's probably going to have way more later. Not many people got in with Denver when it was good deals. You can't get a really good deal in Denver anymore. So if you were lucky enough to get a good deal in Denver, LA, San Fran, Philadelphia, any of those markets, I'd be really hesitant to get rid of that. I have my original rental properties that I started buying in 2011. I got them so cheap. The reality is that even though the equity on them is atrociously high now, because I bought during the crash and now it's a like all-time housing market rush and craziness, I have tons and tons of equity in those properties. Does that mean I want to sell them? At first I thought maybe I did, but then I sat back and I thought, wait a minute, if I sell them, what would I buy, or where would I go to even remotely come close to the same returns I'm getting on those? The answer was nowhere. Meaning, yes, it's so tempting to pull all that equity out and sell the property and get rid of it now. Yay, it's a high housing market. But what am I going to do with that money? To me, it's more worth having that money sit there and continuing to build over time than to rip it all out now, because as soon as I rip it all out now, the returns stop. As long as I hold it, my equity continues to build, my cash flow continues to come in, I continue to get the tax benefits, everything keeps going up. So where do you stand? Do you want to sell your house, whether it's a primary home or a rental property or some form of investment property? Leave a comment below and tell us your scenario. Do you own something that you're pondering selling now? What's your idea or thoughts on what you would do with either the money, or how you would replace that if you even want to replace it? So I'm hoping that this video gave you some good things to think about in terms of answering the question, should I sell my property while housing values are high? Hit that like button if this was helpful. If you haven't already subscribed, please hit that red subscribe button. I put videos out every single week, and my sole intention is for them to help you along your real estate investing journey. So like, subscribe, throw a comment in there, even if it's just to say hi. And yeah, let's put all of this on the table. Let's talk about all of this. The more of us that get to talking, the more ideas we can share. Let's help each other out. It'll be fun.